Warn you now, this is a 101 level discussion on FAIR. You're not going to walk out of this presentation with methodology and being able to go and implement it. Sure. In your organizations, just because there's a lot to know. So this is going to be a very high-level overview, hopefully give you a little bit of an appetite for quantitative analysis. Show of hands, how many people in the room have heard of FAIR? You Googled it? All right. Googled it, my favorite research tool. Good. And how many people in the audience, in the group, are in a security role versus a compliance or a risk analysis role? How many people are in a risk analysis role? Information risk. Anyone outside of information risk, like operational risk? What space are you in?
I'm in software engineering.
Okay. What yourself? Software. How about compliance? A lot of compliance folks. And versions compliance. HIPAA? People? HIPAA? SOX? Yes, all of the above for you, right? Okay, good. Just want to get a flavor of who's in the audience. I'll let you drive.
What? Hey, John. Use the microphone for the video.
Oh, for the video? No.
Oh, you're getting it?
Okay. So these two handsome young men are these two handsome young men. Well, not so young and not so handsome, but nonetheless, it's us. My name is Apolonio Garcia. I'm the president and founder of HealthGuard Security. It's a cybersecurity risk management firm in Cincinnati that specializes in healthcare. We focus primarily on hospitals and the provider space. Company's been around for about 15 years. I've been doing information security for about 19-ish years. I've been doing quantitative analysis and implementing quantitative analysis in the healthcare space for about 7 or 8 years. I had the pleasure of meeting Jack soon after he released FAIR and took a sip of the Kool-Aid and was hooked. So that's who I am.
I'm John Zuziak. I am currently the Chief Information Security Officer for the University of Louisville Hospital. I've been there about 2 weeks, so still, I'll say pretty new. I just got the business cards printed, so the ink's fresh on there, so be careful if you pick one up. Prior to that, I was with Catholic Health Initiatives. They are based out of Denver, but if you know of Kentucky One around here, you know Catholic Health. I was there for about 6 years, so I was there as a information security officer for all of Kentucky One. It was prior to the bringing together of all the hospitals for Kentucky One. So I was focused in Lexington. I work out of my house, I worked at the time out of my house up in Erlanger, Kentucky. So in a kind of week's time, I would travel to Lexington, Louisville, and back up Mid-Triangle. So there's a good path worn out. I pretty much have adopted a highway, I think, on that whole trip there. But focused, when I was at Catholic Health, I was focused on risk management, primarily, obviously, HIPAA security was the focus. We use a variety of different frameworks, but high trust is probably what a lot of people know. And at the time, we were starting to kind of have a discussion and migrate towards using a FAIR analysis for our risk management. Prior to Catholic Health, I was with Pomeroy IT Solutions as their security manager. If you're not familiar with Pomeroy, they're an IT services company, so a completely different type of industry. And I was also in charge of information security there. And then prior to that, I was with Greater Cincinnati Credit Union. So I've kind of hit a lot of different industries and learned that there's problems with all of them. And there's a lot of different things you can carry over from one to the other, but still at the end of the day, they all have the same problems, right? It's just which one you're going to focus on the most, and who's the regulator that's addressing it at the time.
So quick question, people in the back, can you hear us okay? Good. Yes, and also because we obviously have a healthcare background, this isn't healthcare centric, because this is a very industry agnostic methodology you can apply to all of the above. And really quick disclaimer, we're not attorneys, right? There's nothing in here is legal advice. Hell, I'm not even sure if I believe us, so take it all with a grain of salt. Good. So the audience, or how we develop this presentation, it's really two or three different audiences. One is if you're a Chief Information Security Officer or a risk officer, and you are looking for a tool or process or methodology or framework in which to express risk, cyber risk, security risk, and business terms. So that would be one use case for what we're going to cover. Another use case would be if you are someone in compliance and you had an auditor come and say, hey, we've got a high risk issue over here, and you're looking at it saying, that doesn't feel like a high risk issue. I think that's more of a medium or a low, and my intuition's telling me that it's not as bad as you're making it out to be, but I need something to help us kind of prove that. And the third use case would be if you're a security person, an operational security person, and you are just wanting to understand, how do I express all this technical binary ones and zeros security stuff into language that my boss, who maybe a CISO, maybe a CIO or director, and help them understand where we have issues, and really, selfishly, how do I justify the things I'm going to request, right? The tools, the additional controls, the policy changes, etc. So those are kind of three general groups of people that hopefully will get some value out of this presentation.
So to start off, just kind of, how do the boards feel about information security today? Oxford Research went ahead and did a survey in 2016 of about 2,000 different board members to ask questions, are they getting the right information when it comes to information security, cybersecurity, risks, threats, all that, that good stuff. So I guess real quick, how does everyone feel that, their response was? Was it positive in the sense that they're getting the right information, or you feel like we're probably lacking in what we're giving them? That's right. You kind of failed that one. And it came out that about 85% believe that IT security execs are not getting the information that they need from cybersecurity. And to Ab's point before, why that's critical is, as an industry, the cybersecurity industry, information security industry, we're in this whole mature phase, right? We came up from where we were just sort of the stepchild in the back of the room that no one really wanted to talk to, or we're always telling people no. So now we have a seat at the leadership table, the board table. We're part of that, the adult group at Thanksgiving now. So the key is we have to give them the information that they need, or else, unfortunately, they'll probably kick us off the big table. So of that, 54% felt that we're giving them too technical of information. And I don't know, has anyone had this look before from your executives or board members?
Show of hands.
Yeah, I mean it's not a good feeling when you go in and you're all proud of the presentation you put together, and you pulled all that operational metrics, and you know it like the back of your hand, and you get this look from the board. And kind of the point, the key is, if we're constantly going to them asking for resources, asking for funding, we need more headcount, we need better tools, we have to be able to speak their language. That's really what the whole kind of punchline is we need to be able to go to them with information that they understand. Rather than us expect them to meet us, on our side, we need to go over there and show them, this is what it is, this is what this information means, and why it's important to the organization. And here's even worse of a look. So, they said 59%, the survey came out, 59% believe that there's a good chance executives, or the cybersecurity leadership folks, could lose their job, get the old pink slip, because they're giving bad information, or information that no one really understands. At the end of the day, we have to be able to give them that information in order to make the well-informed quality decisions that they need and expect. So now, what's the wish list, right? What does every executive want when it comes to this type of information? Obviously, it's the reports with understandable languages. And I'd call it English, but it's more, it's executive level information. So it's, we have to be able to translate that from our speak, the cybersecurity realm, to board level information. What do they want to see? What do they need to know? And that's where we believe, I'm going to throw you into the bus on that one, we believe that the FAIR kind of model will help give you that information to make that sort of translation. I call it the Rosetta Stone of information security.
Yes, a quick question is, with regard to what you've seen out there in the world today, has anyone found we'll call it Rosetta Stone, I love that,
yeah.
A way to express security risk, cyber risk in business terms? Has anyone found something out there that they use or at least heard of that would help them with that? Show of hands. Good. Good. Oh, then this should be good. This should be good. Because if you guys came out with like 15 things, it's like, well, we can just leave that.
Turns into a round table.
Right. Tell us more. Tell us more.
Okay, so I kind of just gave away the punchline there, but the key of what we've determined and what I've seen just kind of through my experience has been whenever I go into those types of leadership meetings, having quantitative information, the numbers, and making something that it's not just my opinion, it's not, John fact. It really is something that can stand on its own. The board can understand it. Putting in the terms of, for pretty much all of us is going to be regulatory, compliance, the financial impact of something, and then kind of any other specifics that you want to make for your industry and your organization, tying that in there as well. But that makes it something that the board can grab onto, that they understand, that they're able to do something with and make those quality decisions.
Let me maybe add one thing. Does anyone know who John Wheeler is with Gartner? So John Wheeler is one of the lead risk analysts, a brilliant guy in this space, and all operational risk space. And I was having a conversation with him a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that, as we're talking about some of the things that we're working on internally at HealthGuard, one of the things the points that he made to me was, he said, "Apps, if you are presenting to the board, and you use the terms based on my experience, or here's what I believe, you've lost all credibility." Right? If those words come out of your mouth, you're pretty much done. They want to see data, and in security, we've heard about painting a narrative, telling a story, and that's how we convey the security message. That's how we get people, non-IT executives, to understand cyber risk, is by telling them stories, anecdotal stuff, which is useful, but that's only because it's a proxy for data. Right now, per the informal survey I just conducted, people don't have a better way to convey risk.
Okay, so kind of back to what are the boards looking for? The key is they want progress that is being made, that we're making the progress to address the company's risk, right? We're moving that needle forward in a positive manner forward to reduce risk. They want to be able to see that and make it something that's tangible for them. Okay, now it's kind of a journey on this slide. So if you're in the back and you can't see it, I'll use my language to be colorful and paint a picture for you. So this is probably a model that I think most of us are at least accustomed to and what we normally see, where we have decision makers and they're basing their decisions, the information that they have to create the policies and based on the resources out in the field, right? So there's a picture of Congress, which is obviously very efficient when it comes to making decisions and that kind of stuff. Policies, I guess bills being signed. The key over here is the resources. I guess we can say it here, right? These are bombs. So, but it's key, right? It's the generals on the field are down by those of us that are out there executing those policies. It kind of flows around. So in order for us to be able to make sure we have the decision makers setting the right policies and giving us the resources, we have to be able to feed back that quality information, right? We have to make that loop. And the intelligence, that information that's coming in, is coming to us. So we have to be able to spit it back up to them in order to kind of, I guess selfishly, get back what we need out of this, right? The last thing we want is we have these crazy, strict policies that we can't do anything with because we don't have the resources. And I'm sure none of us are in that boat, right? And I know anyone in the healthcare, you're probably struggling the same as I am, where we have fantastic policies, but we struggle getting the resources to deploy. So we have to fix this feed back up to the top.
So risk. So we'll jump into a disclaimer, right? The famous economist, Mr. Box. Everything we're going to describe here is a model, right? And you should never base a decision solely on a model. You should never allow a model to make a decision for you. That's probably a better way to put it, right? It still takes intellect. It still takes a human to take the output of the model, analyze it, and make a decision. And the reality is, and the reason is, because the real world is so complex, you can't account for every variable, every factor, right? So he was brilliant in saying that all models are wrong, some are useful. This is a simple risk analysis model that I would assume everyone is familiar with, where you have threats acting on assets, exploiting some vulnerability that leads to some kind of loss event, impact we call it, right? So pretty standard. This is straight out of NIST 830. And also within NIST 830, they describe 3 forms of risk analysis. Does anyone use NIST 830? A few folks? And this shouldn't be super new. Qualitative analysis, semi-quantitative, and quantitative. So within the qualitative analysis, we're simply assigning some kind of qualitative description to a risk issue, either the impact or the likelihood, the probability or the magnitude of loss, if we're talking in fair parlance. And so, you know, a high times a low is a medium, that type of stuff. Most of us have seen these type of heat maps before. Then semi-quantitative, I actually call pseudo-quantitative, because all we're really doing with semi-quantitative is we're taking those qualitative descriptions and assigning a number to them. And without getting into all the jargon, these are actually just ordinal scales, right? It's just order of numbers. It's not actually a ratio or an integer that we can actually do real math with, right? We can't do multiplication with it. We can't divide this stuff. But we do, right? With these types of models, we actually try to do math with it. And then finally, quantitative analysis, right? These are the hard numbers. You know, basically what we're looking at here is a histogram that was developed using Monte Carlo simulation, which is a form of stochastic analysis. Has anyone seen or used anything like this? A couple heads nodding. So this technology or the process, the Monte Carlo process, was actually developed in the Manhattan Project. When the physicists were trying to figure out how to split the atom, and the computations they were doing were so complex, they actually had to come up with a new way to do that kind of math. And so they developed Monte Carlo analysis. Now it's used pretty readily in almost every type of quantitative type of risk analysis.
All right, so just so you know that we didn't just make this up, you know, on our own the other night. That would have been really cool if we did. So the Open Fair is a open source group. Is that kind of
Yeah, open group. Yeah, open group. Yeah.
That came up with the fair ontology. And so Jack Jones is the creator, and he was with Nationwide Insurance when he created the method, the ontology. I'm not sure what to call that framework. Yeah.
Yep.
And he spun that. You know, he created his own company with that. But still, this is free to use out there. You can pick up information on it and use it. It was adopted by the Open Group in 2014. Great way to document the risk taxonomy standard, risk analysis. It is a proven methodology for this, so there is some kind of meat behind it that says you can use it. Traditionally, it's been used because it kind of came out of the insurance world, been used more in the financial space, but now other kind of industries are starting to pick it up and run with it this time.
And really quickly, John, also interesting to note that since then, ISACA has acknowledged it, NIST has acknowledged it. So this isn't just, a lot of Americans haven't really heard of or used any of the open group standards. It's an international body, but here domestically, NIST and ISACA have acknowledged and now prescribed FAIR as a proven model.
So, kind of the causes of the bad analysis that we have today. And I'll just kind of speak from personal experience. I've lived in many of these different buckets. When I go up and trying to explain risk, a couple of the organizations that I was with, we would bring in, I'll say some of the brightest minds, top-notch, high-dollar types of consultants to come in and help us review our risk management plan. How are we documenting risk? How are we doing our assessments? And the key is on the analysis. And they came up with a lot of the information they gave back to us was really based on more the qualitative analysis. Now, I would even say probably most of them didn't even really come up with the pseudo quantitative. It was really just qualitative. The heat maps were big because it's colorful, and I think a lot of people just like to look at the colors. But that seemed like that was kind of where they kept going with it, right? So we were spending a lot of money, high dollar money, or a lot of money on these solutions, but we're still coming up with the same thing. We go to the boards, we go to leadership. It wasn't anything that was helping them. They were still coming, they were coming to us with the same questions, asking us how is that really going to impact them? What's the scenario that this is, used in? So you'll see, the math on the ordinal scales is definitely the big challenge. And I think another issue that we always had was the cognitive biases. Coming in with sort of our gut feeling of, we would go and really explain with no background to really support us or no information there to support it. We'd give, this is our belief, and that was always a key word. This is our belief, and this is how we feel, what our risk is today. So we're making, a lot of decisions based on people's gut feelings, which is never good.
So this is the beginning of the taxonomy for ontology, as they refer to it now. And the first thing we'll do, there's one of the nice things about FAIR, and even if you don't adopt FAIR in its entirety, I would at least suggest that you look at the way they define threats and vulnerabilities and risk and basically the terminology, the lexicon around security and cyber risk. That in of itself is worth its weight in gold because it gives us some really common language that we could use in our organizations and when we're talking to peers. One of the challenges that we have in the profession is if I say this is a risk, and I walk up to 10 of you and I show it to you, I would probably get at least 3 or 4 different responses to, is that a risk or is that a threat or is that a vulnerability, right? We use that, we don't use the same language, so FAIR helps with that. So really quickly, the basic premise is that risk is the probable frequency and probable magnitude of loss. We use likelihood and impact, but if you're going to talk in probabilistic terms, quantitative terms, it's about probable frequency and magnitude. Now, one of the interesting things, and it took me a while to get around this, but there was genius in Jack's development of using frequency versus probability. I was convinced that we needed to use probability to in the likelihood side of the equation. But what I realized is, after talking to a number of folks in the space that are smarter than me, that with a security incident, it's not, is it going to happen? It's going to happen. You're going to have a phishing attack. You're going to have a virus infection. It's about how often does it happen. So that was one of my little ahas. It took me a couple of years to work out in my head. On the left-hand side, he starts to decompose the loss event frequency. So, one more. So the first piece is threat event frequency. We probably could just jump through these. Is threat event frequency, and that is made up by contact frequency and probability of action. So basically what we're saying here is that the loss event frequency is predicated on how often a threat event is going to occur. That's a bad guy acting against one of the assets that we care about. That could be a IT asset, that could be information, that could be whatever. It could be your car, it could be your home. And how vulnerable we are to that threat, right? So, quick analogy is, if I've got Fort Knox with security guards and SEAL Team 6 surrounding it, and I've got a kid with a BB gun walking up, there's no real risk there, right? The threat cannot circumvent the controls we have in place. So the risk doesn't exist. Does a threat exist? Yes. But is there risk? No. On the threat event side, we've got contact frequency and probability of action. So basically what we're looking at there is how often will that threat come in contact with our asset, and when they come in contact with it, how likely are they to act? So another quick analogy is if you leave your car or leave your laptop in your car, how many times will a threat be exposed to that? Well, if you leave it in the middle of downtown Louisville, probably a few dozen times, right? Someone walking by could potentially be a threat to that asset. It's only when they actually take a hammer or something and break that window and grab the laptop that it actually turns into a threat event. Same thing on the vulnerability side is that's comprised of threat capability and resistance strength, right? So basically, how good is the threat community or the threat actor versus our resistance strength. So going back to that Fort Knox model, is that kid with the BB gun able to overpower SEAL Team 6? Probably not, right? So also really quickly, a quick tangent here is one of the nice things about this taxonomy or the ontology is that you can do the analysis, and we'll show this in a minute, at any level. So you don't, for every scenario you're developing, you don't have to go down to this level. If it's reasonable and appropriate, you can do it at this level or at this level, or whatever level you want, and that may make a little more sense in a minute. On loss magnitude, this is another one of the gems within FAIR, and this is really a paradigm shift, is thinking of loss in terms of primary and secondary loss, right? So again, this is the impact side of the equation. So think about when you have, let's talk about Equifax, right? They just had an oh no moment, right? Where do you think most of the loss in Equifax is going to come into play? Stocks. Where else? In terms of dollars leaving the organization, where is that risk going to materialize? Fines. Maybe some civil actions, right? Lawsuits. Exactly. So the definition of a primary loss factor basically are the losses that occur basically within the four walls of the organization. So with an Equifax type of event, that's going to be the loss and cost of responding to that event. So it could be, the forensics investigators that got to bring in. It could be if there was if there was a stolen laptop or something. It could be replacing that laptop and what it costs to replace that laptop. On the secondary loss side, you're fine. The secondary loss side, that's basically the loss that occurs outside of the organization, secondary stakeholders. So a secondary stakeholder would be a regulator, right? So OCR or the FTC or whoever is going to come after them and basically levy a fine or penalty against them. Or it could be a civil suit, a class action suit. That would be an external entity levying those damages, and that would be an example of a secondary loss. Forms of loss, there's basically 6. Productivity loss, so we would actually try to estimate or calculate what's potential loss productivity. And in Equifax, there's probably some lost productivity because now you've got teams that are having to investigate, respond, and do all this versus their normal day job. But the lost productivity would really be, when can't we make our widgets anymore? So you have a ransomware attack, suddenly your factory is shut down. We can't actually produce what we normally produce. So that would be a productivity loss. Response loss would be, basically just responding to an event. That could be a legal response or internal IT response costs. Replacement would be, again, example being a laptop being stolen or any other asset that's stolen would have cost. Fines, judgments, competitive advantage, and reputation. Those are all different forms that we evaluate when we're calculating loss. We already talked about the secondary loss. So case study?
It's a case study. So an example of how we can use the FAIR ontology to do our analysis. So I'm going to set the stage for this one. So we have, others are reporting the lack of laptop encryption as a high-risk issue, right? I'm sure we're all probably in that recently. The encryption, we go out and we check with our vendors, we see what kind of solution we have. So it costs us somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 to purchase this solution, deploy it, have it up and running on all of our laptops. CFO comes to us, because I'm sure they're going to be involved before asking for $250,000. The CFO comes to us and asks us, is it really worth going down this path, putting in this control for all these laptops, spending this money versus something else we could be doing as an organization?
So this is, when I was talking earlier about the ontology, this analysis is basically going to be at the highest level of abstraction, that loss event frequency and magnitude of loss. So you do your assessment, you talk to your security team and your IT team, and basically you say, guys, with 95% confidence interval, and that's not looking for an absolute certainty, that's looking with 95% confidence, and this is expressed in in the taxonomy and in the framework and how you do this, what's the minimum amount of losses, laptops stolen, you expect per year? And basically they come back to zero, obviously. Right? We could have a great year, we lose no laptops. So, okay, great. What's the maximum that we've seen? And they say, well, last year we had 2, the year before that, it was a bad year, we had 4. Okay, so is that the absolute maximum? They come back and say, no, we actually think 5. 5 is the maximum, again, with 95% confidence. Now, this is a very simplistic example, but just for demonstration. And then you establish what's the most likely. Well, on average, we lose 1 a year. So now, within the calculation, within the model, you've got how often is a bad thing going to happen. That's the loss event frequency. Then, with the loss magnitude, you go through a similar type of process. In some cases, you're going to be interviewing various stakeholders in the organization. You could be talking to legal, you could be talking to finance, you could be talking to people, in healthcare, we're talking to people in clinical engineering, we're talking to people in the emergency department, we're talking to people in pharmacy and lab. And one of the byproducts of this process, of this approach, is you're really learning the business. Right? As a risk analyst, if you're trying to have a seat at the table, if you're trying to be able to express risk in business terms, you kind of need to know the business that you're in. Right? So one of the byproducts of this is that you get to go talk to people and ask some interesting questions and probably learn some things. We do all the time, and we actually sometimes when we're talking to clients, especially with the IT department, we go and do our little analysis and have our conversations. We come back and say, did you know this? We're like, no, we didn't know that. What about this? No, we didn't know that either. And you get to have that conversation. So
on that point, you quickly learn that it's not a bit to bit, a byte to byte. You really learn how all this stuff is being used. It's, to your point, it's a great thing to understand the business and how the technology is being used today.
So you go through a similar scenario as in the first part, and you get the estimate. Okay, if something bad were to happen, we're to have an incident, what's it going to cost to replace it? So you say, okay, our cheapest laptop with the re-imaging process, you calculate that it's going to cost you $1,200 to replace this bad boy. Well, if it's an executive laptop, they've got the latest Surface with all the doodads, $2,500 on the upper bound. And then the most likely is $1,750. That's the average cost of a laptop replacement. Then you do the same thing. What's it going to cost us to response? Well, you start having a conversation. You say, well, what does a response entail? Well, it could entail, maybe we have to have a forensics examiner come in and do an analysis of what's on the hard drive, right? And some of this we can do internally. So internal labor costs at $2,500. Well, what happens is we have to get someone from the insurance company. We have to notify an insurance company, and they have to bring in external legal counsel and then bring in a high-paid forensics examiner. Well, suddenly that price could go up, right? Because you're paying legal costs and you're paying an external forensics company, right? So let's just say, hypothetically, it's $75K. That's the primary loss. That's the internal cost. Now this external cost, the external loss, secondary loss, gets a lot more expensive. And this is actually pretty representative of what we find all the time. And you guys nailed it earlier. It's not the cost of the event. It's all the aftermath, right? The collateral damage, or what do you want to call it, from the event that's actually more expensive. So suddenly response costs, it's not crazy to have $1 million legal bill as a result of a breach. And I guarantee you, Target and Equifax, their bills are a lot higher than that, right? Same thing with fines and judgment, right? This is representative of a healthcare type of setting, but $10 million fine and judgment anymore is just a slap on the hand, right? Maybe you have insurance, maybe you don't, but that's how it works.
And real quick, in most cases, once again, I'll go back to that, I'm not a legal expert by any means, but in most cases, the cyber liability insurance does not cover the fines and judgments. And any type of regulatory penalties, it's not covered by cyber liability insurance. Little fact if anyone's interested.
So this is kind of the punchline on what it would look like on the output of an analysis. And by the way, RiskLens does have a tool, a suite, and RiskLens is a company that Jack Jones is with now, he helped found. They've got tools that do that. There are also, you could do this kind of analysis, and this was actually done in Excel. So you can go get a Monte Carlo plugin for Excel, install it in your Excel, whether it's a free version, open source version like OpenPert is one of them. or you can use one that I actually use for quick and dirty analysis called RiskAmp, and you can do it in Excel. Excel is very powerful. Or you can do something more sophisticated like using R or MATLAB or something like that if you want to do some heavy statistical number crunching. But nonetheless, what we have here is primary loss, secondary loss. This is a little bit of an eye chart, but what this is basically saying, the total loss exposure minimum is 4,800, and I'm blinding myself. Maximum is 734K annualized loss exposure. So now we're able to say, here's all the facts and figures and how we dug up this information. Here's all the assumptions we made, the factors we looked at, and here's what our annualized loss exposure is. And this over here on the bottom is a histogram that represents that data. And so then the punchline being, going back to that auditor question, in this case study, we identified these risk tolerance tiers, if you want to call them that, as very low, low, medium, high, and high, and very high. Low is anything north of 1,000, medium is anything north of 10,000, high is anything north of 100,000, and very high is anything north of 1 million. So this situation, this simulation is actually a medium, right? So you go back to your auditor and say, ha, it's not a high, it's a medium. You're wrong. Which I'm sure they'll endear you. They'll love you for it. So this is the tip of the iceberg, right? There's a lot. We rushed through this. There's a lot of information here. There's a lot of stuff we didn't cover, but we just, again, as I said from the outset, we just wanted to give you a taste, maybe whet your appetite a little bit on that there is something out there that you can turn to help you have those business conversations. A couple of things is if anyone is interested in learning more about a training on Open Fair, you can go to the Open Group or RiskLens, or you can go to our website, healthguardsecurity.com/openfair, and just sign in here. And if we're going to ever bring training to Louisville, right now we don't have it planned, but if there's interest, we would consider bringing training to Louisville. Sign up and we'll keep you posted. Also, if you do this, the exit screen from this sign up will take you to a list of resources, including the taxonomies and stuff, so if you're interested in learning more. So it will actually launch you over to that landing page at the Open Group. So last point will be, there will be a sanitized version of this slide deck available on our website, healthguardsecurity.com/blog, if anyone is interested in the slide deck. And with that, open for questions, and I think we've got record time, about 5 minutes.
So let me ask you, this is one control, this is one thing. What's the time to take a look at your whole organization? What do you think how many people? What's that look like? To use this methodology.
To use Open Fair, or to use Fair in general?
Yeah.
What does it take you now?
Well, right now it's by gut.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So if I was going to implement this, what would it take? Is it a team of people? How does it happen?
I'll give my kind of experience with it, and then you can chime in with what you've seen. So I'm going to say, well, obviously I have to go with it depends, right? Depends on how much you're wanting to look at one time.
He's a consultant, one of
Right, I guess. The key is, what I've experienced and the way it's been is you're able to kind of slice things up. So when you do your you start off with your analysis of your organization and kind of see where the issues are. And this is like phase 2. You step in and start doing that analysis of those areas, but you can focus on certain areas. So you don't have to do everything, the whole organization at one time. You can set, kind of look at.
So the areas of the high risk pretty much.
Yeah, we got an idea. I mean, from knowing the business, you kind of, you understand certain things. But then kind of in your free time, as you start to do other analysis, you see other areas that are either riskier that you never thought about, or things that you thought was your highest risk area that's not really concerned at all. So as you start to have those conversations, you start to kind of fine tune kind of your gut instinct of where things are and how things are laid out, and then you can do the deeper dive and deeper analysis in each one.
I'll give you a 2-part response. One is, don't try to boil the ocean. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Start. So if you've got an issue that someone's asking about, analyze that issue, right? And basically prove that this thing will work, and prove the value to management, because this is going to be new to them, right? And maybe new to you. So prove the worth, get a feather in your cap by doing it once, and seeing if it really resonates with folks. The second thing is, you can do it more scientifically if you want to try to look at the whole picture at once by using external proxy data. So an example of that would be if you go to Privacy Rights Clearinghouse and look up some of the types of events that happen in your industry. Or for us in healthcare, we look at OCR data. It's all publicly available. So we go analyze that data and say, what are the types of events that occur, that are most common, and which ones lead to fines and penalties? Which ones lead to major issues?
Right.
And let's start there. Let's analyze against that scenario. Right, and that's a little more structured way to do it. If you want to take a holistic approach to it.
And usually that's where the questions are coming from, right? Whatever was in the paper last night.
Yeah.
The board just read, they're calling you and saying, hey, what's our risk of this?
Right. Perfect. Any other questions?
Who would typically get trained in something like this? I mean, is it mainly the person who's asking the questions, or do you see other people, like when you get into like reputational harm, how they're, would you train those types of people, or is it just the person typically asking for that information?
Yeah, so that's a little bit of all of the above, but primarily the people that are going to do the heavy lifting on the analysis. So if you're an information risk analyst, whether you do it full time or you do it part time, that would be the person that definitely needs to understand it. Now, everyone that's part of the process for various reasons should be at least understanding of what you're going after. And some of that will happen through kind of osmosis. As you're going through the process, they'll kind of pick it up as you go by the types of questions you're asking and the process you're going through. But one of the issues that we see, and John alluded to it, are the cognitive biases. So there's actually scientific ways to address the cognitive biases, right? So there's the fallacy effect and the recency cognitive bias and things like that that affect how people make decisions and how they interpret the real world. Those types of things need to be addressed. So at the very least, you have to take them through something called subjective probability assessment training, so that when they're giving you data, especially if you're dealing with subject matter expert input into something, you kind of have to make sure that their guesstimates are good. Does that make sense? If you don't have hard data. So back to the main person you want to train is the analyst that's doing the work. But again, if you're going to hand this to a CIO, if you're going to hand this to a CFO, they're going to at least need to know, how do you come up with this, right? To believe the data, right? Ms. Smith.
I work with several different security methodologies, and I apologize, I haven't seen the FAIR concept yet. How does this compare to the high trusts of the world?
Way better.
Way detailed.
So I've worked with high trust for the last 8 years, and it's very different in the sense that when you do high trust, my experience has been there's not a whole lot of analysis on the back end. You kind of start off asking the questions and seeing where your controls and gaps are, but then it sort of ends there. There's not that analysis to see what is our actual risk, right? It's kind of more measured on, we're missing this control. Doesn't matter where it is, what your asset is, so now that's a risk. Where this is going to take all of that into consideration. It's more of a holistic view or approach of what you have. So I say it's a deeper dive. I don't know, we didn't really touch on it, but it's a lot of scenario-based kind of analysis, right? You're kind of making the storyboard of what you're trying to figure out the risk on. You're making that story, and then you're taking that information and telling it to somebody else.
So on a quick plug on that, ISACA, just in the last version of the C-Risk, said that scenario-based analysis is the best practice in the industry. Right? Not everyone's doing it, but that's where we want to be as information risk analysts. I was going to make another point about your question. Think of FAIR as the engine that can go into a bunch of different cars. Yeah. And those cars are different frameworks like NIST or high trust or almost any other framework. You can take FAIR as the risk analysis computation type of engine and just plug it into any one of them. Yeah. And those all still are valid, right?
Yeah, because either way you still have to do the assessment to get that basic information to then analyze.
So take, for example, a hospital, if you were to create a security maturity model, you're recommending FAIR, HIPAA, and maybe PCI as your crosswalk. Would that effectively cover all of the controls for a regular hospital?
I wouldn't even really look at FAIR as part of that crosswalk, that model, but it's step 2. So you're going to do your controls assessment based on all those kind of requirements, and then you take that information and feed it into that engine to understand what's our risk after that. So you still have to do your assessment component, and then you feed it into this thing to come up with the kind of magic formula from there.
So we're big on this CSF, right? That's we're all about it. And if you look at NIST CSF and HIPAA, there's a crosswalk between NIST, CSF, but that's not a replacement for. FAIR is that bolt-on that actually does the analysis. So the CSF is just a framework for referencing controls and getting everyone speaking the same language, right? And FAIR gives you that analysis. I heard applause in the other room, so I think we'll take one more question, if we have one.
Do you do training in Cincinnati, or where do you regularly do training?
Cincinnati would be the primary.
It's on your website?
Yes. Any other questions? Good. So is this different? Show of hands. Interesting nod of heads. Yes. Is this helpful? I think, again, it was a fire hose, so it's a lot of information, but hopefully it's a different take and slant on things. Good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.